Hey there, welcome to 16 Stops, a podcast. This is episode 6. My name is Josh, and I'm here with Brandon.
What's up?
And today we're going to talk about, do you really need a cinema camera? All right, so...
I'm assuming we're going to have some pretty heated battles after we post this thing.
I love how we're already laughing. We haven't even got started the discussion. Okay, so first of all, last episode was awesome, Brandon. It was a kind of a heavy subject, and I appreciate everyone's comments and chiming in, and I think it resonated with a lot of people. So
I think so too.
I think it was a very worthy discussion, and I hope that it kicks off discussions between other creators and people and their families and loved ones and stuff. And I don't know, it's something we're all sort of struggling with, so I appreciate that, and hopefully everyone sort of liked that too.
It's always scary when you put yourself out there and you're a little vulnerable, because you know people on the internet just want to like pounce on that thing like a lion and a wounded gazelle. But I was really surprised to see so many positive comments. And like you said, actually a couple of creators reached out, and I'm excited to talk to them next week. So we're going to have some good chats. So good work, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, we appreciate it. And we're just having a great time. We're going to keep pushing along and just try to stay on track with the episodes weekly. So like usual, we'll talk about some personal stuff and then get into news and rumors, and then we'll talk about cinema cameras. Well, we'll talk about cinema cameras and the news and rumors probably too. But
Yeehaw.
All right, so first of all, audio stuff for the podcast, Brandon. What's going on, man? You keep like returning stuff, buying stuff?
You and I basically bought our Rodecaster Pro 2s at the same time. I had mine for like one episode, and then I just booted it because we just did the news, and the Rode NT1 5th Gen came out, and it was supposed to have the same processing. So I returned the RCP2, and I bought the NT1 5th Gen, which is right here. But I plugged it into my computer, and I really didn't like the interface. And then it sounded like crap. It kept... this is probably user error. I'm admitting that right now. But it kept like skipping. It kept like clipping and falling out, and I couldn't make it work. And then I was like, what if I use the Rodecaster Pro 2 with it? So I rebought the Rodecaster Pro, put this on there, and the floor noise was so loud. And I was like, what the hell? So we're just rocking the pod mic. But I know the pod mic sounds dope with the RCP2.
For sure.
I know that was a lot of words. I'm sorry, Josh, but that's where we're at.
It's all good. So my Rodecaster Pro, I've been enjoying it, but I'm having some issues with it. And I reached out to Rode on Instagram, and they were like, yeah, make sure you send a form to the website, which I did. It's been 3 days. I haven't heard anything. So we'll see, man. I know it's...
Hey, Rode. I know you're all the way down under, but like, let's open those emails, people.
Yeah, like, and then hook us up with a whole bunch of gear, you know? Well, right now we're all just. I don't think they're going to hook us up with anything. We're just complaining about all their gear. Anyways,
I love this combo. I'm not complaining about this combo. Rode,
the sound, like I've never heard that. I mean, I don't know much about audio processing either. And this thing, you press a couple buttons and it's like it sounds good. So I'm happy about that. So Mavic 3, I put another week in with that. The image is great. That drone is unbelievable. It looks great. I'm just getting used to like trying to remember that I'm shooting vertical, so the framing is a little bit tricky, but it's fine to do. Brandon, you just bought into the art documentary course, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, can you talk about that?
Well, sure, I guess. I love documentaries. Those are probably, other than sci-fi and sci-fi like fantasy, that's probably my favorite genres of movies. And it's something I've always wanted to do more seriously. Last year, I filmed a documentary for the AVP and one of its players, my buddy Casey Patterson. And I decided to buy this course to help me flesh out what I shot, because I haven't even touched it in the edit yet. But I thought, hey, maybe this can help me guide me. But it's made by Mark Bone, and I can't remember his partner's name, but he's like a world-class documentary filmmaker. So I'm really excited. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about documentary work and hopefully land some documentary-style brand deals in the future.
That's awesome. I mean, Mark's an awesome creator, filmmaker. I've been following him for a long time, so hopefully, I'm sure there'll be some good stuff in there. I do want to mention that we're both going to NAB, and so Brandon convinced me. I have not been before, and I've been putting it off. And last year I was like, I don't know.
Dude, I'm so stoked you're coming, buddy.
I'm beyond excited, and so we're gonna hang out and in real life and meet a
Yeah,
bunch of
we're
people.
gonna be
So
real life friends.
yeah, real life internet friends. So yeah, we'll be there for a few days. So if anyone's going, just let us know, and we'll try to meet up or whatever. So
Yeah.
I want to talk about my camera saga, continuing camera saga
Oh
for
my
a
gosh,
moment.
Josh. As bad as I
So
am with audio gear,
yeah, so let's talk about the Lumix S5 II for a second. There's a lot of curiosity and interest in this camera because Panasonic makes great cameras, and with the autofocus editions now, it's pretty interesting. And I think from what I've seen, there hasn't been a ton of like independent reviewers, like people that were not invited to Japan and got all the camera gear and like all that stuff. And I've been using it as much as possible over the last month since it came out. I did a couple comparison videos comparing it with the R6 Mark II and the A7 IV, which are like the comparable cameras. And I just can't find a spot for it in my workflow. I think that's really the bottom line. So I really am rooting for Lumix. I think there's a lot of value in that camera for sure. But I think for a lot of people, I don't see them switching from Canon or Sony. I can't really.
it's just not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, some people are going to disagree with me, but it depends on how you use the camera. And that really was what it comes down to. And that's a lot of what I said in my videos. For me, when I'm filming myself, it was losing autofocus occasionally. Like it was pretty good, but it wasn't as good as Canon or Sony. And so for that, I would rather just grab a Sony camera or Canon camera. So definitely check out those videos if you're interested. I made some like really nerdy comparison videos, which you should definitely check out.
That's what you're good at,
yeah,
man.
thanks, dude.
You're really good at
thanks,
it.
dude. Those are hard to make. Those are really hard to make.
Yeah, they were like 30-minute videos.
And I'm just like nonstop information, So with that, I will be not continuing my journey with Lumix for the time being. And I decided to pick up an R5 instead, which I know. I know. Well, so I'm shooting on the R6 Mark II today. I do love my Canon cameras, and I love my Sony cameras too. I'm really excited about whatever's coming down the line for Canon, like we talked about before with the updates and stuff.
Yeah, it was a smart pickup, I think, for you.
Yeah. So what people always question my camera choices, and a lot of the times, like I don't need very much to actually do my job, which is like my client work is very basic as of right now, and like YouTube, like you don't need anything crazy, which we're gonna get into some of that stuff in this podcast for sure. But a lot of times I need cameras to make content about because I have a camera channel. So I think the R5 is going to get really interesting this year, so I'm happy to pick one up.
I don't know how Canon did this, but those geniuses over at Canon somewhat resurrected, not a dead camera, but Sony kind of like helped kickstart that. When they came out with the A7 R5, it was pretty easy to make comparisons to the R5, right? The Canon R5.
Yeah.
But it kind of felt like a dead camera at that point. And then Sony kind of like gave it a little breather. They got the jumper cables and like kind of pumped some life into it. And then Canon's like, dude, we're just going to come out with an update and we're going to send out this big rumor. Now everybody's like clamoring to get an R5. I've even seen their sell prices start to climb just a little bit. Man.
Yeah. So anyways, we'll see how that goes. I'm hoping from the rumors that maybe it'll be at NAB and we'll be there. It'll be cool. And hopefully we'll see those new cinema cameras too. So maybe we'll get some like legitimate reactions if we're there. So Brandon and I are just going to have to point cameras at each other the whole weekend.
And you understand why I told you I was bringing a camera to this. You're like, you're going to take a camera? I'm like, bro, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'll have you stop bringing a camera, but I got to figure out what camera now. It's going to be a whole nother discussion. We should have a whole video about what gear we're bringing to NAB. No one's going to care.
I had a call with Tyler Edwards and he was like, hey, are you bringing a camera? I was like, bro, I'm bringing so much gear because we're going to...
Well, you're also driving.
I'm driving, so it's very easy for me to bring stuff. And I told him, and I've told you, I was like, you guys don't need to worry about it. You tell me what you want from me and I can bring it down. But I know we're probably going to do a live or a post NAB type of podcast and give you our experience. So still want it to look good. I want it to sound good. So really easy to bring all the gear down with me.
Yeah, we'll have a discussion with Tyler and try to figure everything out because we don't have to bring doubles of everything if we can share some stuff because we have a lot of similar gear. Anyways, let's talk about some news and rumors now.
Hit it.
All right, so the big one I think is the new Sony camera, which is supposed to come out at the end of March. And we have a name now. It's the Sony ZV1. And the specs are leaking out fast and furious right now. So, so from all the rumors, mainly from, again, Sony Alpha rumors, I have to take, like, they're kind of the main rumor site for that, but I'm seeing a lot of people, a lot of YouTubers posting about this as well. So basically, it's getting dialed down to, like, it's a ZV style camera, which if you're not familiar with that, like the ZV-E10, there's also the ZV1. So Brandon, I know you get these confused. The ZV1 is the, like, 1-inch sensor, point and shoot, built-in lens.
Who's not going to get confused with this?
They make so much sense. What are you talking about?
God.
ZV1, ZV-E1, ZV-E10. All right, so the ZV-E10 is the APS-C version. So that's like an A6400 essentially, but in a different, slightly different body. Basically, they're like, they have a lot of automatic controls in them, and they have less dials and stuff. They're kind of a simplified version and sort of made more towards like automation. So that sort of thing. So it's basically going to be an A7S III or an FX3 inside. So it's going to have that 12 megapixel sensor, but it's going to be in like an A7C style size body. So very small and compact, no EVF.
Is it going to have like the same processing bit rates, frame rates?
Yeah, that's all up in the air. I don't really, I mean, we'll have to see, like, until the announcements come out. They're saying up to 4K 120, but 120 frames per second may not come out right away. It might be in a later firmware update.
You got to buy it for $200.
Yeah, I don't know what the limitation is there. My question is going to be overheating. That's going to be a big question mark for me. I think that's already been, sort of talked about. When you take a big camera and you shove it in a small case, I mean, there's potential there for sure, especially if 4K 60, we'll see. I didn't see if there's IBIS or not, so that's a question mark. I'd assume so if they're taking the A7S III sensor, but again, I have no idea. The ZV-E10 doesn't have STAB, and the A6600 does, so they could have probably fit it in there. So I don't know about that. I'd probably assume there is IBIS though. And again, this is going to be like, the ZV style is really aimed at like a vlogging camera. So like, I'm laughing because I feel like this could be the third swing and miss for Sony's vlogging cameras. So let's take a step back. We have the ZV-1, which is, again, that 1-inch sensor, point and shoot, built-in lens. But the full frame equivalent is like 24 millimeters. And when you put some STAB on it, it's like 28 or 30. It's like...
That's pretty punched in.
It's pretty punched in. And then you had the ZV-1F, which that like came and went pretty quickly. I don't think anyone was really behind that camera for the most part. So the question I have about this is, like, which lens are they going to sell this with? So the price is rumored to be like $2,000, $2,500, which is not cheap, but also, like, if you're getting an A7S III for $2,000, that makes it cheap, but it's not a cheap camera. But I think what we're seeing from Sony is they are reusing parts from other cameras. So like the FX30 was an FX3 body with some other stuff shoved in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be a lot of recycled parts. And I think the main objective with this is trying to get as cheap as possible. So what lens are they going to put with this, Brandon? Like, that's what their only kit lens really is the 28-70. Which, like, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, that
like,
would be funny. Don't they have is that the APS-C lens though? I was thinking of the 21.4 or whatnot.
Yeah, but they're going to offer like a variable aperture zoom, like, as a kit lens for like a couple $100,
That's
right?
true. I guess I was thinking, what lens would I pair with it?
Oh yeah, I mean, but again, on their cheaper side, like, you can't throw in, a constant aperture.
I don't know enough about Sony's glass offerings.
Unless they're coming out with a new lens, like their kit lens is that 28-70, which comes on like the A7 III, maybe the A7 IV, I can't remember. So I don't know. There's going to be the new autofocus system out of the A7 R5, which is awesome if that happens, because that's their newest and greatest, which is kind of Sony's thing. They always just take whatever's new, throw it in there. There's some new AI maybe in there. One thing about the ZV style cameras is they have features like background defocus, which is like, if you don't know what you're doing and you're in auto mode, you hit that and it just like opens up the aperture all the way and adjusts everything else. So if you want to like blur the background, you just hit that. Again, Brandon, this is...
I love that they have like a button to just obliterate the background. It's like, we've gone to DEF CON, you flipped up the plastic thing that covers the toggle, you flip the toggle, and then you're like, launch the nukes.
This is...
just obliterate.
This is not for people like us. This is like, if you're just getting in and you're running auto and you want a blurry background, you don't have to know what you're talking about. You just hit the button and it'll, crank up the shutter for you. There's also like the product showcase mode where like I think it turns like the face recognition off. So if you want to like hold something up, it'll focus on it quickly great for tech and demo and stuff like that. So maybe there's some more stuff along those lines. But anyways, that's the ZV1 as of right now. As I said,
I'm sure Peter Lindgren will have a video about it.
I'm sure a lot of people will, man. This is Sony. So we'll see a whole bunch of those. Any thoughts about that? Or you want to move on to the next camera?
Let's just move on.
All right. Let's talk about the Nikon Z8 a little bit. And I know both of us are not very up with the Nikon system. So yeah, anyways. So the Z8 is rumored.
All of my Nikon news comes from Jared Polin yelling at me every Wednesday.
Do you absorb it in that format, or
He's the obliterate button. I just turn it on. Nikon.
All right. So the Z8 is supposed to be the same sensor as the Z9, which, if you don't know, the Z9 is their flagship camera. It's a 45.7 megapixel stacked sensor, so super fancy. And it's going to be a slightly smaller body. So it's going to be, from what I've seen so far, it's like a D850, but like skinnier because it's not a DSLR. So it'll be a little bigger than the Z7, but smaller than the Z9. It'll have like great autofocus, good EVF. There'll be some stuff taken out of the Z9 because the Z9 can shoot like 8K 60 and 4K 60 RAW, and it can shoot 8K 30 and 4K 1. It does like
120 frames a second.
Yeah, so it does all that kind of stuff. So the announcement expected before the summer. We don't know. Price, they're saying around 4,500 euros. So again, no idea. All right, so we'll see. It's cool to see them coming out with a new camera. I think
everybody that's used a Z9 has raved about it. So I'm kind of excited to see what a Z8 brings. I think that would be pretty cool.
It's great. And for the Nikon shooters out there, they're probably going to love it. And also, it's just more competition. Even if you're not a Nikon shooter, like, I'm happy to see.
Gotta love the competition.
Gotta love it. So we'll keep an eye on that. There are some early rumors about the S1H Mark II, but this is so early, I don't even want to talk about it yet. So we'll keep an eye on that too. I know we're all kind of looking forward to seeing what Panasonic puts in that camera.
Mm-hmm.
There were some minor firmware updates that came out for the R6, the R7, and the R10. They were very minor, but there was an issue with the R6. This is the Mark I, and they, like, the next day released a version 0.1 or whatever, like, to fix it. So it's surprising me how many times there's issues with firmware updates. And there was the issue.
They come out with it and then everything bricks.
Yeah, there was the FX30 or the the FX3 update that came out, and it bricked cameras. And they had to send, if it happened to you, you literally had to send your camera back to Sony. And I saw in a Facebook group that they had to replace the guy's like chip or motherboard or something in the camera. Like, it totally destroyed it.
Holy moly.
And it's just like, oh, well. So, like, I don't know. It's
frustrating.
Sony. So on that line too, the Sony A7 IV firmware 2.0, which we talked about in a previous episode, which was mainly to include their cloud service with nothing else really, which was a bummer, but kind of goes in line with Sony's updates nowadays, or lack of updates. I saw some issues that people were posting about that where it got hung up like halfway through and people had to like pull out the battery and do all sorts of stuff. So I don't know. Like, I figured they'd get the stuff sorted, but I don't know. If a firmware update comes out, I'd probably always wait a few days to see if anyone else has a problem with it.
They're just testing on like one dude's camera. They're like, "Hey, Bill, can we borrow your camera to see if this thing works?"
Yeah.
Oh, it worked. Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Push it.
Yeah. Although if we're at NAB and there is an R5 update, I'm putting it on right away.
Just right away. I don't care what it
Give
does.
me a computer. Let's go.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a
stick it in my vein.
Sony's new retinal projection camera kit. This is some cool tech, Brandon, and I know you looked into this a little bit. Can you talk about that just for a moment?
I looked into it. I just think it's cool because Sony is essentially helping the visually impaired have a more accessible way to get involved with photography. So I think it's pretty rad. Do I know all of the technology behind it? No, I don't. The cameras, what really caught me was just simply how unusual the apparatus was that you used it. And I was like, what is that? I've never seen a camera like that. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's a new kit that Sony's coming out with to just essentially help the visually impaired shoot more photos. It uses like a laser projection viewfinder to help do that. How it works, I do not know.
Very cool. All right, let's talk about the C70 a little bit. So one thing I noticed this week or a few days ago was that they're selling it with the speed booster included for free now. So
something's going on.
So that's a $600 accessory that they're just throwing in. So like we're talking about rumblings, like something's going on with Canon right now with the price drops. Again, they didn't drop the price of the C70, but most people that buy the C70 also buy the speed booster. So to me, that's like a $600 price drop, which is pretty crazy. And you were saying you've seen some more people who aren't C70 shooters starting to play with them too, right?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of YouTubers get sent the C70. Like Canon's reached out to them and be like, "Hey, do you wanna test this out?" And I kind of feel like Canon's like, "All right, we're creating something new. Let's see if we can sell the remaining stock of these C70s using our YouTube influence army."
So the C70 replacement is coming out, is what you think?
Yes.
Okay. Which is cool. Although the C70 has held up really well. Like it is still a really good camera and will be for a long time.
Freaking love this camera.
Yeah, it's so great. I still want one, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. Okay, so on piggybacking to this stuff about Canon, we have a new theory about the R5 update and sort of the future of some of the Canon stuff. And Brandon and I have been talking about this, and we're kind of theorizing and come to a conclusion that maybe
it's just a theory, people. It's just a theory.
Good. Thank you for the disclaimer. We have no inside information about this. But we have a theory that there is going to be a new log curve coming out. And maybe this is our theory. Maybe this is our wish. Maybe this is, I don't know. But let's just talk about our theory because this is it's going to be fun. So if you take a step back and think about the log profiles, we have C-Log, then came out C-Log 2, which you see in the cinema cameras. And then they came out with C-Log 3, which has less dynamic range than C-Log 2. The reason why it's 3 is because it came out after 2, not because it's better than 2. Again, not doesn't make sense. And so basically it has less dynamic range and they just crush out the shadows so you don't see as much noise, and they tell people it's easier to grade, but they don't put, well, it is because you don't have to deal with the noise, but if you know what you're doing, you can deal with that in other ways, like exposure, noise reduction, all that kind of stuff. So we're always complaining about not having enough dynamic range in their mirrorless cameras, R5, R5C, R6 Mark II, all that stuff. They've said before that they didn't put C-Log 2 in those cameras because the sensor can't handle it or something. But they say just shoot in RAW and then you bring it into the computer, it'll interpret it as C-Log 2. Like just put C-Log 2 in the camera. So I think they're going to come out with a new log curve for mirrorless cameras, for their high-end mirrorless cameras. That's my thought process. What do you think, Brandon?
If Canon ended up putting log 2 in there, I think that would be them like backtracking on what they say. And they don't really have a tendency to do that.
Overheating.
So I think what it is if they create a new log profile, it allows them to appease us, the people saying, hey, we want more dynamic range. They've got new cinema cameras coming forward or going forward, so they can put the new log profile. We think it's going to be called log 4 or whatever, C-Log 4. But they can put that in the higher end cameras, in cameras like the R5, R5C, R3. That gives us the dynamic range we want, but they're not going back on their word and now putting C-Log 2 an outdated or, an older log curve, in retrospect to other cameras, retroactively.
So
sorry.
if it's an actual limitation of some sort, then C-Log 2 can't be in the R5 and the R5C. Like if we're going from their word here, maybe log 4 is what Brandon and I are calling it, C-Log 4. Maybe that gives us more than C-Log 3, but it's not quite as good as C-Log 2. But it really maximizes those mirrorless camera sensors. So that's
something tells me that like the sensor couldn't handle it isn't valid, but instead of doing the thing they're telling us they can't do, they're going to give us a log profile that's as good, but it's not C-Log 2, and so they don't look like they lied.
Yeah, and maybe there's also that differentiation between the cinema and non-cinema operating system, because I know we've talked about that before, and maybe this is just designed for mirrorless cameras. So maybe that's another whole thing. Like maybe it works with the MP4 codec. Maybe it just works differently on that side of it.
Yeah, and just like the R5C, maybe like the R5 has a version of C-Log 4 and it works a certain way, and then once you put it in a cinema camera, depending on the processing power or whatever, then it's got more juice in the squeeze, as I heard somebody say.
So the question mark, and again, we're really going deep on this theory, but the question mark here is where they cut it off. And I think it'll be in the R5, R5C, and the R3. I think they need more of a differentiator if they're going to stretch out the R5 between the R5 and the R6 too, because they're so similar right now. So that would help a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. So fingers crossed we're getting a new log curve.
And since we're going to NAB and one of the Canon people sees this, feel free to call me an idiot while we're at NAB.
Yeah, I mean, we could totally be wrong.
Super wrong.
Yeah, we're just giving you pixel shift. That's the new feature.
Yeah, again, this is just a theory. Me and Josh are just hoping and wishing.
Okay.
But I think there's some plausibility to it, Josh.
All right, so enough with that theory. Let's get on to talking about the main topic, which is a great segue because we're talking about C-Log and cinema cameras and all that kind of stuff. So there is so much to this discussion, like all the topics I feel like we covered. So
oh man,
I think we're going to talk a little bit about our experiences first with cinema cameras, and then we'll sort of get into, do you need one? What is a cinema camera? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brandon, where do you want to start with the cinema camera discussion?
Where I want to start is with you, Josh. I know you've had plenty of experience with FX3, FX6, a C70, an R5C, but what you haven't told the people that I know, and I think Tyler Edwards knows, and that's about it, you had a red Komodo.
Yeah, I did. I had it for like a month, and I never talked about this on my channel, although you brought it up, I think, in a live stream. You like wanted me to talk about it.
I kind of did on the down low, and somebody's like, what? You had a red?
Yeah.
And you were quickly like, no, just get out of here.
So I'm a total camera nerd. I want all the cameras. So let's just get that out of the way. Like if I could have all the cameras, I would have all the cameras, and I want to try all of them. So it's a camera that's always intrigued me. You obviously, like, the fact that you can get a red for $6,000 is still mind-blowing, even years after it's come out. Like, I'm still like, you can get a red for $6,000? Like, that's crazy. And I have friends like you and Tyler who shoot on the Komodo and love it, and I've always wanted to try it, and you guys talked me into it. And I knew getting it that, like, I had no actual use for this camera. Like, I don't need a red Komodo for the stuff I do.
There was like the couple of weeks following up where you were starting to hit me up more and more about the red. And I remember sending you a text like, Josh, you're not going to like it. You're going to see the image and be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But the entire workflow of that camera, you're going to be like, this is so stupid. And what happened?
Yeah. And I knew that. I knew it was going to happen. Like, I had to get out of my system. Like, every camera, I used it for a while, and then I'm like, yeah. And my friends are like, yeah, you're not keeping that camera. I'm like, yeah, probably not. So you're right, though. The image out of that camera is super special. Like, it really is super cool. And there is something neat about that camera that you can't put your finger on. And not just in terms of the image that comes out of it with the R3D, the color science, there's like a texture that comes out of that camera that I just can't explain, like the image. But it is a pain to work with. There's a lot of stuff that if you're coming from the mirrorless world, don't just think it's a small camera. You're dealing with a whole bunch more stuff. The boot time is crazy long. You have to deal with the SDI protocol, which I had no idea about before I started using the camera. The file sizes are absolutely massive. The autofocus is not great. It has a weird crop that you have to get used to. Like, it's 1.33, which is not either full frame or super 35. So there's a lot going on with it. And I bought it and I was going to use it in my studio. And I actually did put out some videos using it. So probably no one noticed is probably another part of this discussion that for what I'm doing, like, that extra image quality was going to waste.
Yeah. Like I said, we kind of knew where you were going to probably go with this camera. My favorite part about this whole story is that you got rid of it, and just a few weeks ago, you were like, God, I really want one again.
I wanted one the whole time. Even when I got rid of it, I was like, I still want this camera. I just have no use for it. And that's the issue, is like, I try to be realistic about this stuff, and I want to try it and use it and understand it, because I think there's value in experimenting with other camera systems, because we hear as creators all the time, like, you could have shot this on so-and-so. Like, I use my Komodo all the time for the fun projects that I want to shoot, not because, well, like you said, there is something to the image. There's a texture, there's like a weight to it. Like, it's got something that no other camera I have.
has. Like I've got a C70 R5C. Can you make them look really similar? For sure, but there is something to it. But there is something to this camera that I just love. Like I like the experience of shooting on this camera. Do I need one? And could I make everything else I've made with something besides a C70 or a Komodo? Absolutely. But there are things that are in these cameras on a workflow side that just make the experience really enjoyable. And even though I could shoot this on an R6 and be fine, I could shoot almost everything on an R7, I'd be fine. But after using cinema cameras for a while, they have some features that I don't know if I want to go back to not having.
Okay, so let's talk about those features. I think it's a good place to start because when I got into all this stuff, there was like, what is a cinema camera, right? Like there was like and I always heard it has to have NDs and XLR. I always heard that for so long, right? You've heard that too. People say it doesn't have NDs. It's not, but it's like, are you going to call a Komodo not a cinema camera? It doesn't have NDs or an XLR input.
Yeah. It's interesting because actually a lot of cinema cameras
don't have either.
Don't have NDs, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it is weird when we get the comments that are like, that's not a cinema camera. And it's like, well, the company says it is. So what do you want me to do about it?
So I think we're going to skirt around that what is a cinema camera discussion because I think it's really just like you said, the camera companies. Like I have my FX3 here.
Okay.
It says cinema.
Well,
it says cinema line on it. So is it not a cinema camera? Like,
yeah,
it's gray. It matches the FX6 and the FX9.
We should probably skirt around it, but Josh, this would be a good opportunity to just hear your thoughts, my thoughts, as to like what do you think makes a cinema camera?
I have no idea anymore, Brandon. I think that's really comes down to like for me, it's really about like a video focused camera that really doesn't have has fewer compromises from like a hybrid camera to me. So there's certain cameras that you pick up that are just made to shoot video.
So maybe that's it. It's a camera that does not shoot photos.
No, it can shoot like the FX3 shoots photos, right?
Yeah, it does. Is the FX3 a cinema camera, Josh? It doesn't have shutter angle. It doesn't have waveform. It doesn't have false color. It doesn't have SDI.
Yeah, there's all those things that are important to some people. I don't know. Like, I have no idea. It has the same sensor as the FX6.
Yeah.
You know, like you can get very similar images out of those two cameras.
Yeah. So you can't boil it down to image quality because we now have like mirrorless cameras that produce an image that is as good as many cinema cameras out there.
Agreed. But I think like you're saying, there's a lot of features. So some of the features that I like to see in these kinds of cameras, like you said, DCI, shutter angle, having exposure tools like waveform and false color are awesome. Having ports like HDMI, full-size HDMI, SDI, like those sorts of things. ND filters are great. Audio inputs are great. These are things that really help with video workflows, but I don't know what is a cinema camera.
Yeah, it's a tough one to define now, for sure. I think for me, no record limit is a big one, right?
Yeah, is that really a thing anymore? Like for new camera? I mean, minus the R5. Like I think everything's coming with no record limits now, right?
It's starting to, but it's been a thing. I'm just specifying.
For sure.
I'm just specifying. I don't want a camera because at one point I had like the C70 and I had the Komodo, but I had an R5 and I was like, gosh, dang it! Like if I want to go live and I want to use a 3-camera setup for my live, like the R5 isn't even an option. So now we're getting there, thank God. But no record limit, no overheating.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one. I think things that make speed a priority, so like shutter angle, exposure tools that make you expose very quickly. I mean, having NDs is great, but like I said, there are plenty of cinema cameras that don't have NDs. I think you need to have a certain level of dynamic range and image quality. But I mean, that's subjective. I think image quality is subjective up to a point. So yeah, I don't know, Josh.
Yeah, dynamic range.
I don't know what a cinema camera is
I was going to throw
anymore.
dynamic range in there for sure. But video focused, I think, is another one. And I wouldn't, I wouldn't say like some of these, like we're saying before, like the ZVE style cameras, like are those video focused? But like, there's a lot of automatic modes and stuff like that. So I think it depends on what you're doing. But really, like good image quality, good dynamic range, and the stuff we talked about, I think are kind of similarities between a lot of the cinema cameras that are out there right now.
And then it needs to have enough clout that you can hold it over your friend's head and be like, I have this and you don't. I think that's also really important.
Okay,
I use a cinema camera.
So if
you're a bum.
Well, this is like you being a Red owner, right? Is that what you're saying? Like,
no, not at all. Not at all.
You know what I'm talking about. There's a whole I own a Red. Like it's like people put that in there. Like,
is that a Red?
Is that a Red? Or like they put it in their like Instagram thing, or like I own a Red.
Shot on red.
Anyways, now that we got that out of the way, let's talk for a moment about like who needs a cinema camera, or if we need cinema cameras. Like maybe we'll start with that. So I'll kick it off here. So I really like working on cinema cameras. I loved owning the C70. It's still one of my favorite cameras I've ever owned. It might be my favorite camera I've owned and used of like these cameras. Just because of workflow. Like that camera is so easy. There's nothing to attach. You take it out of your bag or your case, you put a lens on it, put a microphone on it, like it's good to go. You have everything in there. It's a workhorse. It's never going to overheat. Great image quality, insane dynamic range. There's some things that I struggle with on a daily basis when I use mirrorless cameras for my work. So, for example, right now I'm shooting on the R6 Mark II. Amazing image. I'm really happy with how this camera operates. It runs forever. It doesn't overheat. So checks off those boxes. But the interface and how it works is very challenging for my workflow. Like custom white balance in the Canon mirrorless cameras is a joke.
It's that's a nice way to put it, honestly.
You have to take a photo, you have to switch it to photo mode, take a photo, then go back over and like go into custom white balance, select the photo, and then change it to custom white balance. Most of the other cameras, you move a box on something, you press a button, done.
White,
done. The interface it has with the HDMI output is also a joke. Like these are the things, like if you are using this camera and sending out a monitor feed, like so right now, which you can't see, but like the feed I'm sending to Brandon's got all my like display information on it, so I could still see that and record in. Anyways,
I'm looking at Josh and I can see the tracking going around his eye.
So anyway, but it doesn't matter because I'm not streaming. So, but it's those sorts of things where it's just a slower workflow for me when I'm shooting. Now there's some stuff like my client work right now, like mirrorless camera is totally fine. I'm doing exterior real estate stuff, vertical video, works great. When I was doing documentary work for my farming channel, having a camera like a C70 was amazing because it has everything built in and you can just go out and shoot great battery life too. Brandon, where do you see like some of the features in the cinema cameras that you like to have on a regular basis? Because it sounds like your main you have 3 cinema cameras right now.
That's at this point, like, I don't know if I want to go back to a mirrorless that doesn't have the workflow options that these types of cameras do. It's funny because like I have a Komodo and it's like the opposite of a C70. It's so much slower. There's so much less to that camera, right? It doesn't give you the IO. It doesn't give you the ports that you would want. It doesn't give you dual recording, any of that. But for some reason, I still love it. But the features that I wouldn't want to go back to are shutter speed. Like once you go shutter angle, it's so much harder. Internal ND is so nice. When I did that documentary shoot last year, it was in Huntington Beach, bright sunny day. It was awesome having internal NDs. I shot a ton on the C70 and I shot all of like the action stuff on the Komodo. Just it's mostly either menu system workflow stuff or it's IO stuff that makes my life easier that I don't want to go back to. I don't want to go back to micro HDMI. I've either got full size or SDI. I've got clean HDMI feeds. I never have to worry about like weird stuff happening on there. With my Komodo, I can use my phone or my iPad, so I can actually rig it up in really weird areas and get my image. It's amazing for that. And sometimes it makes it faster than the C70. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wouldn't want to go back to. The exposure tools
Mm-hmm.
are awesome on both of these cameras. And like you said, they're workhorses. Like I run these cameras so much and I really never have to worry about them. They just always work and they're fun to shoot with. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, another one was like because I had the FX3 in my studio setup for a while, and I do rotate cameras around quite a bit because I'm always playing with stuff. But one feature like which they added recently is to be able to put custom LUTs into the camera, and then you can view it with that LUT. So if you have your own LUT or a LUT that you're going to grade it with anyways, you can see exactly what it looks like coming out of camera. And you can also, if you're doing something like this, where I'm recording in log, but I want to put out Rec 7 on image to Brandon, or if I'm streaming or something like that, you have the option to do that. So those kinds of little things, like in the Canon cameras, like even just putting the view assist on to spit over HDMI, like we're talking the C70 R5C, we have that ability in the menu system to do that. That's a huge workflow advantage for me. Because like right now, I have to use a Ninja V to put a LUT on this so I can send out a Rec 7 on image. And there's all these like, right? Like how else can you do that, right? If you're using a mirrorless camera. So those are the kind of like little workflow things that just, are hard for me to deal with.
Yeah. So just to clarify to everybody watching, the stuff that me and Josh are doing, we absolutely could do on mirrorless cameras. But if you're somebody that's only shot on mirrorless cameras and you haven't had experience with any cinema cameras, there are things with these cameras that just make your life so much easier. And at this point, I don't want to go back.
And we're very lucky to have these tools, and we've worked many years to earn income to buy these things. So we feel very lucky to have them, and we could do all of our stuff on much cheaper cameras. But after a point when you're investing and you can get tools that help you a little bit, it does make your life easier. All right, so let's talk about some of the cameras that are on the market that we've been talking about already. I think of this in a few different groups. We have like the sort of $6,000 cameras. We have the like $3,000 to $4,000 cameras. Then we have some outliers as well. So the first main group, we're going to talk about cinema cameras kind of under $10,000. I didn't say that, but so we have the FX6, the Sony FX6, the Canon C70, and the Red Komodo. I think are sort of the three that get tossed around a lot. So yeah, overall thoughts. You haven't used the FX6, but C70 and Komodo.
Yeah, I haven't used the FX6. I would love to at some point. It looks rad. I love that handle, the integrated handle. When we did the build your perfect, camera, mine was the Komodo with just much more functionality. That's kind of where the FX6 almost feels like to me. It's like, it doesn't have some of that stuff, but I'm just saying that the FX6 looks incredibly functional. Yeah.
Okay.
But are we going to count the R5C? Because I also have that.
We're going to put that in a different category with the FX3.
Okay.
So as I've already sort of talked about in this episode about the C70 and all of its benefits, what do you think of the drawbacks of the C70, Brandon? Like, what do you think could be improved on that camera?
Drawbacks of the C70. For me, honestly, I guess I'm a pretty upbeat guy, and it takes me a long time I've bagged on a lot of cameras in this podcast over the last 6 episodes. So I'm just going to retract all that and say, with the C70 at least, I don't have a lot of negative to say. Even the sensor, even though it's an APS-C sensor, I don't mind it so much because I use the speed booster on it all of the time. And my Komodo's, like a Super 35 sensor. I'd say the screen is a bad one for me. Just build quality.
Yes.
Like the screen is great. The image is great, but the build quality is really poor. The body, the ergonomics are funky. It's not a camera that I feel like you can hold comfortably for an extended period of time because it can't articulate, and your wrists kind of need to do that. So those are the big ones for me. I love all the buttons. I love how you can program all of the buttons. The I/O is awesome. I'm looking at it right now to see if I see anything that I don't like. And I guess build quality in general, would you say the C70 feels a little cheap?
Yeah, it does. And it doesn't really fit in with Canon's sort of build quality in general. Like they make very solid cameras. Like everyone's like, yeah, it's Canon. It's a solid camera. When that camera came out, everyone's like, wait a minute, the screen hinge is Like, you need to get that fixed. Like,
yeah, it's like, meow, 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 meow.
and I think it does. If you've ever held one, it definitely feels cheaper than a lot of the other cameras in terms of the materials and all that stuff. And the hinge on like the first year they put out that camera, you have to send it into Canon to get it fixed, and they reinforce it. They know it was an issue. To me, the couple things I have to complain about the C70, and there's not much, is yes, it is a Super 35. I wish it was full frame, but that camera would be so much more expensive. It comes down to lensing, right? Because they put the RF mount on there, and all the good RF lenses are full frame lenses. And so it's just like, if they had some nice APS-C Super 35 lenses, that would be great. I'm not the biggest fan of the speed booster for flaring issues outside, and so I tend to stay away from it, which is a well-documented issue as well with the speed booster. But really, there really aren't many complaints about the camera other than ergonomics and the build quality, and then if you care about full frame or not. But it's a great camera. And I want to talk about the FX6 for a moment because I have used that camera too. And it is a really cool camera, but there are some drawbacks with that camera that I found. First of which is if you take the top handle off, there's no audio anywhere on the camera. There's a scratch mic. That was a huge mistake. I think in the previous...
That was weird.
With the FS7, if I remember correctly, there was like one, or FS5. No, it's FS5, I think, is where that body size is coming from. There was one XLR on the body and one on the handle, and they're like, no, we're just going to put them both on the handle. But like, at least put a 3.5 millimeter jack. I know everyone watching this has probably heard this. That was a huge complaint. There is no stabilization in that camera whatsoever. There's not even electronic stabilization. So that is something that's in the Sony system. I don't know why they didn't put that in there. And they don't have a lot of stabilized lenses. For most people who are shooting, like those sorts of cameras, they don't really care about stabilization, but it seems silly when it's in the other Sony cameras. The thing I love about that camera is the ND filter system, which we talked about in the Building the Perfect Camera podcast, because it's really sweet. The big difference I think about with the FX6 and the C70 is that the FX6 has the same sensor that's in the A7S III, which is a $3,500 camera. The C70 has the same sensor that's in the other direction, right? In the C300 Mark III, which was originally $11,000. So to me, you're getting a much nicer image out of that because it has a much more expensive sensor. Again, FX6 is full frame. So they're both awesome. I think there's different uses for both of them. And I think if you're in the Sony system, I think the Sony has a lot more cameras to pair up with it that match really well and work together. Like the FX3, FX6 is a great combo, or A7S III, FX6 is a great combo. I think it really depends on which system you're in. But for me, like when I was matching the C70 with like the R5 for a B cam, now you have a full frame camera with a Super 35. Are you putting a speed booster on the C70 and then using EF lenses and adapting those on the R5? Or are you, like we talked about this before, like there's all these like thoughts that you have to go through. Like, are we just going to rock RF lenses and then I'm Super 35? And then, you have to think about that. So that to me was like hard unless you just buy two C70s, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. And so where does the...
There's definitely a checklist. There's the Canon checklist that you got to go
through.
The
workarounds. Okay.
The workaround checklist.
Workarounds. And so how does the Komodo fit in with these cameras, Brandon? Because I know you have a lot more experience than I do, obviously.
Oh, man. It doesn't. It doesn't fit in because it was never designed to be this type of camera. It was never designed to be your A camera. It was made to be a crash cam. So that's why we get a camera that does so little other than make a really cool image. So I think if you were looking at that camera, the Komodo, you got to know, like, it does not have the functionality these other cameras because it was never designed to have that. They have that camera. That's the Raptor. That's just going to set you back 30 grand. So yeah, it's weird. The only reason it fits in is because it has a Super 35 sensor like the C70. It costs $6 grand like the other two cameras. But I think that's kind of where it ends, other than, image quality. But like we talked about, like, you can get great image quality out of like a $2,000 camera now. So I don't think it's that. So the Komodo is kind of like an outlier, but it was a $6,000 red and people started buying it, and it's so much fun to shoot on. The image is crazy, and it's kind of blown up to where they're seriously thinking about, all right, do we make a bigger Komodo that fits the needs of what people are asking for in an A cam?
I agree with all that, and I think it just gets lumped in because it's $6,000. If you're looking for a $6,000 camera, you're like, those are the three cameras you're sort of thinking about, but it is very, very different. And like you said, it wasn't designed to be a camera that people are using it for. So you do have to add a lot of accessories. You need an audio option. Like we said, with ND filters, there's a lot of like, there's a little bit of rigging that has to happen. You don't have the same autofocus levels. So there's definitely some stuff that you have to trade off if you're going to be thinking about a Red versus the other one. And the other thing is frame rates, Brandon, because I don't know, like high frame rates is not awesome on the Komodo.
No, it's I want to say in 6K. I mean, that's the highest resolution it has. I think 48 frames a second is the highest in I think the 241. I can't remember. It's interesting because I've really enjoyed shooting higher frame rates, but the 40 that's on the Komodo looks so damn good to me. Whenever I shoot it, I never feel like I actually need something slower. So for me, I think it's cool. I've never used the C70 for a time lapse or an FX6, but it's also got other weird frame rates. Like you can do like 6 frames a second and shoot some amazing time lapse on it. So it doesn't go really, really fast, or it doesn't have high frame rates, but it's got other features that are really cool. And Red has been amazing about updating this camera.
Yes, they have.
With things that people want.
Same with the C70. So let's keep that in mind too. They've had some crazy updates. That camera is very different from when it came out. They added RAW, which I still can't believe they added because it totally cannibalizes C300 Mark III. They've also added a lot of autofocus updates. So that's been a very different camera. The FX6, I don't think has gotten a lot. I think it got the focus breathing compensation is the main one that I can think of. But we know Sony is with the updates. So
yeah. I would say with the Komodo, just to kind of like finish up the Komodo, unless you got more to say. But the thing is I would say 90% of the shooting situations I would find myself in for jobs or just for stuff that I'm doing, videos, YouTube, I wouldn't pick it up. If it comes down to like which is the smart camera to grab, I'd grab my C70 or my R5C. But it's fun. And so when I have a chance to use it, when there's no deadlines or payments being money being exchanged, that's kind of the camera I always grab.
Yeah, it's a slower camera to work with, and you have to realize that it's not going to be as quick as some of these other cameras. You can pull them out of your bag and be ready to rip, and you got autofocus and all that
the
stuff.
C70 is like instant. You turn it up, it's like ready to go, and the Komodo you got a 30-second delay,
and then you got to wait a few minutes for the camera to warm up as well. Like you can't just start shooting right away. So
yeah, you can. It's not advised. I do it all the time.
Okay, good
but
to know.
Ideally, you should black shade. I mean, you're supposed to black shade the C70 too. Like there's a place in there to black shade the C70. But with the Komodo, yes, you have to let it get up to temp. You'll see like the T and the E go green, and once that's there, then you can like black shade the camera, and that means you just put the lens cap on, and it calibrates the sensor, and that takes sometimes like 4 minutes, and then you're good to go.
And then do the STI protocol and all that stuff as well.
Oh yeah. Don't screw that up, or you're gonna blow an STI port.
Yeah. All right. So there's some. It takes a while to shoot on that sometimes. It's
some finagling.
Yeah, it's not as quick, and so I think that's the big difference. But it is a very cool camera. All right, let's go down to that like other category, which these cameras are so different, but I'm gonna lump them together anyways. The FX3 and the R5C, and I'll just mention the FX30, but let's be real, it's a very different camera as well.
Are we lumping these in because they're kind of like the hybrid cinema camera?
Yeah, they're like a hybrid body. They do photo as well.
Similarly priced.
Yeah, so the R5C is now 4,400,
FX30,
and the FX3 is 3,900. So very similar. Very different cameras as well. But this idea of like a mirrorless hybrid cinema camera. Sorry, that's what they are, right? Like,
yeah, I mean that's what I would label. Excuse me. That's what Jesus. That's what I would label it as.
Yeah, and they're really cool because they're compact. They have a lot of features. The FX3 is such a small camera, and it's so cool that it's so small and it won't overheat. It'll run forever. It does 4K 120. Yeah, you know all the specs about these cameras probably if you're watching this.
Yeah, a bunch of gear wackos out there.
Yeah, but like you do lose a couple things. Like you don't get NDs on this. If you want XLR, you have to add the handle. Like it's not in the body, stuff like that. You can take photos, which is nice. I think we're going to see more stuff like this evolve. I think that price point of like 3, 4, 4,500 is more approachable than the $6,000 cameras. And I think for a lot of people that are in the mirrorless world, these cameras are also more comfortable for them because this is what they're used to.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think we're going to see more of these types of cameras hitting the market.
So powerful. The fact that they don't overheat and can shoot high frame rates and great dynamic range and all that sort of stuff. So the FX3, I have to lump it in there just because Sony called it a cinema camera, but like...
Is it?
It's pretty much an FX3. I mean, spec-wise.
Yeah, it's just got the smaller sensor, right?
Smaller sensor, yep. Less dynamic range, not as good in low light, that kind of stuff. But for the price, man, it's hard to beat the FX30 for $1,800.
I've got a buddy that's getting a podcast sponsored by Amazon. That's what I told him to go with. It's like, if this is your first camera and you need something that won't overheat, has incredible autofocus, and you're in a studio, so you don't need to like worry so much about like crazy dynamic range, get that camera. It's going to be a champ.
Yeah, for sure. We got some outliers here. The Ronin 4D, which I feel like doesn't...
camera.
Yeah, the chicken head camera. I remember when that came out, that was my first thought, and I think I posted somewhere. I was like, oh, that's so funny. And then everyone's like, oh, the chicken head camera, because I've owned a lot of chickens in my life. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and that just got a crazy new hardware update with that like detachable head that you can put on there.
The Venice update.
Have you ever used the 4D, or have you like... I don't know. Have you ever touched one or been around one?
I haven't. I have not used one. I think I said this in our last podcast. The big camera store downtown has one. And every time I look at it, I just don't think they would let me use it. Every other camera, I'm like, hey, guys, can I see that? I think if I was like, hey, can I see that Ronin 4D? They'd, no, Brandon, go away.
It's so interesting, and I've even recently been like, this would be so much fun for real estate. Like, it has the built-in gimbal with the like Z-axis stabilization.
Yeah.
But it's like such a interesting camera, and I don't know how many people are actually using it for production. Like,
Josh, it's a heavy camera.
Oh, it's heavy?
Okay. So my buddy Joey, shout out to Joey Helms. Joey Helms is in Iceland, and DJI sent him to Iceland with the camera. Yeah. And he hit me up, and he was like, dude, this camera is so heavy.
How heavy is it?
I think, I don't want to misquote him.
Okay.
But with the battery and everything attached, he said it was like 10 or 11 pounds.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, if you add up like a camera, I guess a camera and a gimbal and a monitor, it's not that much. Okay. So that's something to consider. But it's cool to see the tech that's in that camera with the built-in stabilizer, all the LiDAR autofocus, all the modularity, which we talked about in the Building the Perfect Camera episode. So
yeah, they did some really wild stuff with that camera. It's going to be weird to see like a version 2 where they go with it. Just for me, it seems cumbersome. Like having weight close to your body is not that bad, but the further you move that away from you, gosh, that's just going to get super uncomfortable. So it seems like a camera you almost have to wear with like an easy rig all the time.
I was just going to say that would probably be great with an easy rig. But I just am curious about how many people own them and are using them for actual productions. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple other cameras I want to talk about. The Blackmagic. We have to mention Blackmagic here because, we also have the 6K Pro.
My first cinema camera.
Yeah, and those cameras are like amazing for the money, and still a lot of people are using them for production. I just want to see a new Blackmagic camera, guys.
I know. NAB, Josh. I think Blackmagic.
Have you heard anything?
No, but I think from what I know, Blackmagic is just kind of notorious as using NAB as like the place where they unveil big, cool stuff. And so I'm hoping Blackmagic and Canon kind of get together and make a publicity baby, just like unveil really cool stuff all weekend long.
Okay, but I thought we were hoping for like the Red Canon collaboration. I thought that's what we were hoping for.
Well, I mean, that's down the line. I'm pretty sure that's happening anyway. Jared has mentioned it in a few smaller live streams, but I for one, really, really want to see Blackmagic
We
deliver
all
on
do.
like a box red Komodo style camera. I think there, like you said, plenty of people that want that. And hopefully at NAB, they'll drop something. They'll unveil something. I'm fingers crossed.
There's a lot of people that launch their careers with those cameras. So there's a lot of image quality in there for the money. And it's still, a lot of people are using them for sure. I have a couple honorable mentions here. I guess one more, the Sigma FP.
That thing is mind-bendingly tiny. It's so small. That's so, the first time I actually held one and checked one out was at NAB. I remember Justin, is it Phipps or Phillips? I don't remember. But anyway, he did his review and that kind of sparked like a ton of interest in NAB. There was one, I got to hold it. I was like, what the hell? It was so small.
Yeah, incredible sensor from what I've seen. Obviously, a lot of workarounds with that camera and a lot of things you have to like add to it to make it work. But a really cool camera. I've been really tempted to pick one up and play with it, but again, I have no use for that camera. So
it's I am starting. We've talked about this before. All of my core stuff is so well filled out that the only things that interest me now are super fringy type of cameras.
yeah, for sure. Honorable mention here is a C300 Mark III, just because the price got reduced to $9,000. But I think for most people, you're better off getting a C70 than a C300 Mark III for the price.
Yeah. Most people don't even need a cinema camera. And if you're probably looking at one, you're better off with a C70 than the C300.
Okay, so let's try to wrap up the discussion about if you need a cinema camera or not, because I think maybe it's like you've made it kind of thing when you buy a cinema camera. Because I know for me, Brandon, like when I was progressing through YouTube and I was, I had APS-C and then I got my first full frame camera and then I got like my first mirrorless camera. And then it was like, oh my God, I'm going to get a cinema camera. And that was like, I have a cinema camera. Now it's like the real deal. And then I started using like, I bought a C100 Mark II and I was like, I do not need a C100 Mark II. You know what I mean? For the kind of work that I'm doing. And so I don't know if it's like a status thing. It's like you feel more confident. You feel like you are now a filmmaker. I think there's some of that too. But the reality is with our mirrorless cameras now, we can get pretty much the same image out of a lot of these cameras.
Yeah, I would say, I think for most people that are thinking about getting a cinema camera, don't get one if you think you're going to see a huge improvement to image quality. You're probably not.
I think back to that video that Peter McKinnon came out with, and he was like,
yeah.
do you even need a cinema camera? That was like a year or two ago, right?
Yeah, where he sold his red Monstro. And then everybody was like, Pete's ditching his stuff. Well, then I don't need it.
But I think also in the last few years, we've seen mirrorless cameras come out that are so powerful that for most situations, you may not need or want a cinema camera.
Yeah. Well, I think that big one, like you said, there's that 30-minute record limit, not overheating. We're getting more cameras with like cinema camera features like shutter angle, waveform, false color built in. All of those things that you would typically get on a cinema camera, you can now get on a $2,000 like mirrorless camera. And that's probably all you need until you're on set shooting for production.
For most of our work, like the mirrorless cameras are great. And I do also want to mention one other thing about cinema cameras. There is the appeal of having a cinema camera on set. So I don't want to discount that because I know a lot of us know that that's BS, but like it does make a difference. If you show up with a big camera, people they're like, whoa, we're getting our money's worth out of this.
But that's probably the one situation where I'm like, yes, you could really benefit from having a cinema camera rather than showing up with your R6 Mark II.
Yeah, and so a lot of people will take their mirrorless cameras and rig them out, put like cages and matte boxes and all sorts of stuff to make their camera look bigger. But I think if you're working with clients that know your work, after a while, it's not going to matter as much. But if you're hired and you show up for a expensive job and you pull out a little camera, people are going to be like, that's what you're going to shoot on? And you're like, dude, it makes the same image as other. They don't know. They just see a little camera, so you got to keep that in mind as well. Appearances are important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So are we telling people to buy cinema cameras or not? I don't know how we decided to end this conversation.
I am never not going to regret telling somebody to buy a Komodo. I have no regrets nigh forcing you to buy one.
Okay, because it wasn't your bank account, so I get it. That's fine.
I understand. And but did you enjoyed the experience mostly while you had one, and you dipped the toe in, and now you get me a little bit more.
Okay, and I get that camera now, and these cameras are so much fun to shoot on. If you're a camera nerd and you're enjoying shooting on they're so much fun. The bigger cameras, they're fun to shoot on for sure. So
yeah,
don't go out and go buy all these cameras as well. Like find
Josh,
some
are you
buddies.
gonna get a Raptor now?
No, I'm not getting. I can't afford a Raptor. I have to
Dude,
sell
you could
every
shoot 400 like frames a second for one of
If I
your
sold
reviews.
every piece of camera gear and lens and everything, maybe also my computer, maybe then I could buy a Raptor, and then I wouldn't know what to do with it. I still couldn't make YouTube videos. All right. Well, we appreciate everyone tuning in again. Thank you so much for all the support. Make sure you hit subscribe down below if you aren't already, and we'll see you guys real soon.
Peace.